Well, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome once again to Beyond Compliance. My name is Aaron Bolshaw with Safety Chain Software. I am the moderator of Beyond Compliance. For those of you joining us, maybe for that first time, quick primer, we at Beyond Compliance, so we provide a periodic industry update for process manufacturers. Our goal, simple, is bring you insights from around the market that shape the way we grow our businesses, deliver quality products to customers, mitigate supply chain risks, safeguard our brands, and of course, all of this while improving yields and maximizing productivity. So today we're getting into a really hot topic. We like to try and cover this once or twice a year. Audits, it's a fantastic way to kind of connect and keep people top of mind on best practices, tips, and tricks. And today, with the help of our good partners at Exemplar Global, we are going to dig into the ISO side of the house and learn how to supercharge your internal audits for a better ROI. So with that, I just want to quickly mention the series sponsor is, of course, Safety Chain, which is the #1 plant management platform that unites compliance, safety, quality, and production. We are scheduled here today for about an hour. As usual, we'll remain flexible with our time. So we may go the full hour. We may end up with a few minutes back in our days. Either way, we will get to some questions. And that's the real point here. We can't hear you. You might be screaming right now, or you might be at home with the dog barking. No matter, we can also only see you and hear from you if you use that questions panel over on the right to the webinar console. So please do so throughout the presentation, and we'll save time toward the end to get to as many as we can. And to answer the question everyone loves to ask right away, will I get the deck? Will I get the replay? Will I get the materials following the webinar? Absolutely, give us a shout. We'll get that to you. And we'd love to make sure that you can distribute that to your teams or however you'd like to do that. So with that, I want to introduce our speaker today. Jim Moran is the president of Simplify ISO and founder of Internal Management System Institute. He's got over 30 years of implementing ISO standards for businesses. So we've got 30 years experience. He actually was the designed lead auditor. He designed the lead auditor courses, for SAI Global, SGS, and BSI. And Jim also served on the ISO project committee for management consultancy to actually create ISO 2700 standards. So Jim, welcome to Beyond Compliance.
Thank you so much, Aaron. It's great to be here today, and I'm glad we've got such a great crowd out. And thanks to the audience for taking time out of their busy schedules to join us. Back to you, Aaron.
Yeah, it's we've got hundreds of people that registered today, so it's always a great topic. And before we start, we're going to get to a poll question here in just a second. I wanted to ask you just to tell us a little bit more about Simplify ISO, if you would, Jim.
Oh, sure. Thanks, Aaron. I started building systems in 1992, and the sort of recurring issues that seemed to come up and still showed up in surveys by BSI, SAI Global, were sort of three main issues. Document control was one, not closing out nonconformances was another, and then the last one, of course, not doing internal audits or not finishing up for the audit. So we designed some software 8 years ago to take care of all those issues. And our clients are happy, keep growing. And the International Management System Institute is for people who want to become management system professionals, sort of beyond the traditional stuff. Thanks.
Yeah, and that IMS side, that's more of, is that consulting or is that more of the training side of the house? You're going to get
training, absolutely, Aaron. People go through the 6 courses, they do 6 projects, kind of like the Project Management Institute model, and then they join the forum with us and exchange ideas about running their own systems better in their own areas.
All right, well, I encourage everyone, definitely write those down. See some website visitors to both those sites later. And Jim, we like to start out here sometimes just to get a temperature of everyone in the room. And so I'm going to pull up a poll here really quickly. We just want to know what are the most important topics today you'd like to learn about. I'm going to launch this. So everyone just pay attention to your screen. You're going to see a poll pop up in front of you. We're not taking your name. we're just gonna ask you. So please be honest in your opinions. Keep clicking. We've got 1 vote so far. All you got to do is move your mouse over there, click one of those radial down. Do you want to learn more about this next generation we're proposing? But processes and documentation or auditor interview techniques. How about improving non-conformance language? Or maybe it's just general risk management. Let's take a couple of seconds to do that. We got 16, 18, 19, 23. All right, now we see the people voting. Take a second. It really does help us as presenters, Jim, to dive into the areas that we really want to stick to and explore more. So we will, just a couple of seconds here, wrap up the poll and show everybody just a pie chart. Actually, it's not a pie chart, Jim, I lied. It's a
bar graph. A bar graph.
Okay. I'm going to close this poll. Thank you. We got 74% of the people that voted. And all right, here we go. Next gen taking the lead here. So what do you think? We're gonna cover some of this, right? Or are we covering all?
Absolutely. Actually, the entire presentation is based on this, what you'd call the next generation approach. You could call it an approach to auditing. Yeah, thanks.
Awesome. Yeah, so I'm going to hide this. We're going to get back over to this. So, well, and I did notice there was a strong risk management approach, which we're going to get into as well. So why don't you take us through, Jim, what we're covering today and jump into the meat?
Good, thanks, Aaron. This next generation auditing topic that looks pretty interesting is just talking more about the idea of not looking so much for non-conformances, not looking to see if people are following the procedures, and then finding a way to help. This is more for third-party auditors, your registrar's auditor, finding a way to help without consulting. We'll talk a little bit more about the details of that when we get to it as well. Then in the second section, we're going to get into this topic of interview techniques. That's always something that people seem to enjoy learning about. So as far as not looking for non-conformances, a better thing to focus on is actually talking to your auditee about results. Does the process, the way it's implemented right now, give you the result that you need? Sometimes organizations emphasize following procedures too much. Now, obviously, if you're a welder and there's a specific way to put 2 pieces of metal together, naturally you want to follow the procedures. And in many countries, the welding boards require documented procedures. But sometimes people need the flexibility in your other organizations to use their brain. I often talk to organizations about giving people credit for having a brain. And of course, the 9001 standard and the 2015 version removed all requirements for any documented procedures except the ones that you want for yourselves. The other thing you can ask a person is, are there risks around your activities being managed well? And most people are aware of what they are and often don't just take a minute or two to stop and think about it. So as the internal auditor working with this person, or even a registrar's auditor, even a third-party auditor, it's a great idea to talk about risk management. And then if any of you have delved into Nassim Taleb's book, either The Black Swan or Anti-Fragile, then you'll want to get asking them how they can make things flow better. The better things flow, the stronger you are, the more resilient you are. And obviously, the person who's doing the activity, the person you're interviewing is the auditor, is the best person to point out ways that things could be better. In order to make that happen, of course, you have to get off the focus of, are you following your procedure? Just ask if the procedure is getting you the results you need, and then find out if there's some way that or something they could suggest. There's lots of danger in creating a culture where people feel either threatened if they don't follow a procedure, or somehow nervous about getting caught if they don't follow a procedure. And that can actually lead in some cases to hazardous situations where a poorly designed procedure, and that's what this reveals, by the way, is the procedure designed right, Sometimes following a badly designed procedure or a procedure that's missing a step can be quite hazardous and can actually create nonconformances where you wish they weren't. I can guarantee you, not a single person in any one of our visitors organizations who's here today, not a single person woke up this morning and said, I wonder how badly I can do my job today. As humans, we're programmed to succeed. Even if you pass out, you still got all these backup systems in you, keeps you breathing, keeps your heart beating. So people inherently want to be successful. They want to feel good about their job. And following procedures, if it enhances that, that's great. But sometimes they can find a better way to do things just because they have this desire to do well. And based on that, you can see that you won't get the right result if you're following a poorly designed procedure. It could be too wordy. It could be complicated. It might not flow properly. No, don't forget that a checklist can double as a work instruction. So that helps keep things simple. And another fact you might be interested in is that the human brain, this is data from the Visual Learning Alliance, the human brain can process images or visual information 60,000 times faster than text. I was just in a specialist office yesterday and they must have had 25 signs up around the place, no pictures. Had some blood taken a few months ago and they actually had 3 or 4 panel pictures, visuals, photographs of people had taken and posted to show how to take blood. So every world can be improved if you can just start finding creative ways to show people information, but visually. And another thing to keep in mind is that people won't be particularly enthused about making suggestions for changes if they know it's going to be 4 months or 6 months or longer before they see the results. And it doesn't have to, of course, in any organization, there's no rule that says if somebody suggests something, it has to be done. But make sure that your document control procedure doesn't appear to be so heavy and detailed and lengthy to people that they say, I'm not going to even bother telling them about this idea. I'll just mark it here on my paper copy of my procedure so I remember how to do it, and good luck to everybody else. So the simpler it is, the easier it is. I'm sure you'll find in the safety chain modules how simple it can be to make changes. Same with ours, the idea that just make the change and get the number of reviewers you need down as low as possible. And this might all add up to a situation where you're getting people to suggest small improvements, even just tiny things. Because if work flows better and people are enthused about, excuse me, about using the system as it exists, then you'll definitely get better results. And again, if you can reveal these things from an internal audit, that's what improves the return on the time invested in the audit. And without finding improvements, the audit is just a liability instead of an asset. And then one way to make this happen is to use flowcharts. I imagine many of you out there today have some of your processes designed like this, and you can see in this particular one, this model or this type of flowchart is known as a cross-functional flowchart. Some people refer to those horizontal lanes as swim lanes, but it definitely helps you follow the workflow and make sure that the workflow is conducive to the best possible efficiencies that you can get. And you can take a flowchart like this, and any one of these boxes could have a hyperlink on it, and it could link to a lower level sub-process. It could link to a form. We have a number of our clients will put a little tree on a process box where there's an environmental issue. They put a little hard hat on another box that's particularly dangerous to employees. Quality might have a Q in a circle or a check mark or something like that, just to identify places where things could go wrong. Another thing that's really powerful with a flow chart is to put a paper version up and put little pins in the boxes where issues are happening on a regular basis, even despite your corrective action activities. And that shows people visually immediately where the bottlenecks are. Another thing that's helpful too, to think about as a third-party auditor, is to remember that you're not the expert on their processes. And this might be somewhat true if you're visiting another department in your own organization and doing the internal audit there. And as with third-party auditors, you're only there a few days a year, unless you go through the area on your way to your own spot in your organization. And since you're not the expert, since you're only there a few days, especially for the third-party auditors, what happens then is if you suggest a fix, you'll be blamed if it doesn't work. And it could even be more serious than that. In some cases, you might actually be, there may be litigation that would involve you, where they suggest that you told them to do it this way, they did it, and it turned out not as well as they would have expected. Now this, again, there may be some third-party auditors today. You may have some other points to ask. And even as a third-party auditor, sometimes if you write things as an OFI with language like you may want to consider, sometimes they'll still try to suggest that you had told them to do it that way. So that's a very dangerous area. Internally, the opposite. You can help out as the internal auditor. You can help them find ways to do things better. You can see opportunities. And I'll just go back to the flow chart too for a second. When you find an area, let's say, I wonder if this is can you see this box here? This it can be any box. If you use the flow chart to design improvements, you can look both downstream to the next parts of the flow, or you can look upstream and determine if anything needs to change here in order to affect the change you want to have happen here. So if you're not using flow charts yet, make sure you give them a good look. So in this particular section, the first thing we talked about was focusing on non-conformances will dilute the effectiveness of an audit. There's so much more. Keep an eye on results. Start with determining whether the person you're talking to is getting the right result. Determine whether the person you're talking to is aware of the risks and is happy that they're being managed well. And then find out if they have any suggestions for improvement. And that's actually a good measure. The suggestions for improvement is often a good measure of success for an audit. Did we find any number of opportunities to make things better? And then finally, consult if you're an internal auditor, but not a third-party auditor. And Aaron, I think we have a poll.
Yeah, we do. I'm going to get this going in a second, but I want to just take a second. We're talking a little bit about, hey, what are some improving our language skills here? You said a couple of things I wanted to reiterate. The questions, the right questions to ask can really push a business forward and ultimately end up safeguarding your brand and doing much better work. One you said was, are your procedures getting you the results you need? It definitely switches the focus from show me your procedures and let's look at that box, but to say, let's focus on the results, because that gives somebody the ability to say, oh, maybe I do need to revisit those procedures, right? Is the procedure designed right? So I love that. So thank you for that information. Yeah, we're gonna do another poll here.
All right.
And let's see here. Oh yeah, what are some areas of growth you see and we're just gonna narrow it down for your next audit, whether that's tomorrow or next week or whenever it is, if that's an internal or external. I'm gonna pull this and launch this poll very quickly. What are some areas of growth you'd like to see for your next audit? And you can select more than one here, right? Are you wanting to stop looking for just non-conformances because you know intrinsically that's just not the right approach? Are you wanting to stop asking if you're just doing these procedures right? Are you trying to get less procedure based and more outcome or result focused? Ask about the right results. You want to ask about risk management more and really focus on how we're managing risk day to day in those operations, in those procedures, or just general opportunities for improvement. So we got about 10% of people have voted. Go ahead and put in, remember, you can vote for 2, 3, 4, all of them if you want, but we're just going to show the same poll results in about 10 seconds after a few more people vote. Again, Jim, we've got a couple hundred people that have registered, a bunch of people online here. So we're getting a good N factor, if you will. We're getting good statistical reliability, as they say. So I'm going to close this poll. We got a couple more people just clicking the buttons the last second, and I'm going to share these. So anything jump out at you right away?
I'm glad to see asking about the right result has resonated with people. And if you're interested, if you can Google a next generation auditing, was a paper put out by IRCA. It was a while back, but the concept just rang a bell in my head, and I realized immediately that looking for the right result is having the person explain to you if they're getting close to the right result or moving away from the right result. This is really a tool for a great tool for people to improve the effectiveness of the system. And then here we have opportunities for improvement as sort of I wouldn't say clear winner, but the leader. And that's where you'll get your money back from the time and effort you put into an internal audit. Make the system better. And it'll also make you stronger too, and much more resilient if you keep looking for ways to make things better. Thanks, Sarah.
That mentality of growth mentality and continuous improvement. Something that sticks out to me here, Jim, is that the lowest here, I'm going to go to the other side. Stop looking for non-conformance. What I sense here is that, you know what, we are trained to look for non-conformances. That's kind of part of the game, right? And so I see behind that a mentality of, hey, we still need to find problems so that we can stress our processes and fix and adjust our processes. And that's not a bad thing. You're only going to get there when you fail, when you find weaknesses in the systems. But instead, encourage people that when they do find these results, or when you start to find non-conformances, look towards empowering them to contribute to adjusting the procedures and processes. Often that's just making lines of communication available to management, middle management, or above, right? Often that's instilling a sense of, I have the power to do better work on the floor. And that's not at all easy. So that's a culture.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we need to remember that the person who's doing the activity is the ultimate expert in that activity, and develop a culture where people are encouraged to show us their strengths and encouraged to make suggestion. That's where the empowerment you mentioned is so vital to organizations. Thank you. Yeah. All right. So let's get into the next section. Let me see if I can get, let's try this button. No, I'll click on the screen itself and then use that little arrow at the bottom. There we go. So here we are, as we see in the section 2 showing up. We're going to talk about interview techniques to try to achieve all the things that we just talked about. And of course, the overarching everything is the culture that your organization has. You might say the culture that leadership has created, and that'll have a bearing on whether or not people are willing to talk to you. But your language during the interview can make a difference as well. So we talked about creating a conversation, simplifying your evidence gathering. I've got some things to show you, and they might be able to be built into the Safety Chain software if you have form makers. And then following the workflow, we're going to use the same picture we saw, but we just emphasize a slightly different part of it. So the asking people to prove that they're following the procedures is really an interrogation. Or if you ask a question like, who is responsible for filing the form XYZ? That's a test question. And people feel like you're there testing them to see if they know what they're doing. It's not an investigation. That kind of assumes that something has gone wrong, or you might be anticipating that they're going to do something wrong. And the other thing about just asking about following the procedures is that in order to be compliant, if I could use that word, people will definitely give you the evidence of where they have followed the procedure, but conveniently leaving out the parts where they follow the procedure. So it's doubly, and it's a double issue, if I could say it that way, that people are they feel bound to prove something, and the other opposite side of that, flip side of that coin, is sometimes they'll hide things. But if you're having a conversation and you're encouraging suggestions on how to improve it, you'll be less likely to have the wool pulled over your eyes. The other thing too is when I said stop looking for nonconformances, I can assure you that if you use the results, the risks, and the improvement suggestion approach, the nonconformances are going to show up anyway. And they'll be more willing, they'll be more open with you to talk about what the issues are, what they see as opportunities. And the other thing too is the philosophy. Inspectors are looking for problems, like the health inspector looking for cockroaches in the restaurant kitchen, but auditors are looking for conformance. So it's a different philosophy, and sometimes it's hard to forget that. So let's just get down here again. There we go. There we are. And they'll cooperate more, and with a spirit of collaboration during an internal audit, people will be happy and proud to show you what they're up to, how things are working, and how they want to get along with you. Of course, you're a partner with them, not an adversary, and that makes all the difference. They'll be more willing to share the problem spots and show you where you can improve the workflow, the flow chart, and maybe there are some forms that have complicated or confusing things in them. The other thing too is they can all become spokespersons for how well the audit went and how they felt like they were part of helping make the organization run better. And that doesn't always happen in internal audits. It sometimes happens with external audits, but it's probably even more rare there. And remember that these people are the horsepower in your organization. Leadership's great, but it's all happening on the ground, and these people are making it happen. And even, as I said before, no one wakes up and asks themselves how badly they can do their job. And people can only perform as well as the work environment, ISO 9001 clause 7.1.4, they can only perform as well as the tools, the equipment, the procedures. And so if you can make the procedures better, then you can possibly get better cooperation, better performance. So you can find ways to gather evidence if you're using a flow chart like this. You can take this first box here and put it on a blank checklist right here in the activity. So this process would be, let's say, performing internal audits. The first activity would be plan the audit or choose the scope, choose the objectives, and then the evidence you'd write in here would be that you saw the audit plan, it was dated, the objective was complete. If something's missing, you could put an OFI here, and I use the second page where I list all these, or if there was no plan, it would be a non-conformance. But everywhere you go in your organization, no matter what you're auditing, there will be people. There's going to be an infrastructure. There's going to be a work environment. You're required in all the standards to make sure awareness has happened and communication happens. And then obviously there will be documents, so that you want to make sure document control is underway. So if you do these 6 areas here every time you talk to somebody, and you can just put a check mark in there, then you don't have to ever go out and do an audit about the work environment or infrastructure or document control. You're doing it continually as you go through an audit. Then here's what we were talking about earlier. Does the activity produce the intended result? 1 to 5, and you'll see up here 1 or 2 would be a non-conformance, 3 or 4 an opportunity for improvement, and 5 is okay. So you're looking at the result. You're looking at, are there risks associated with this activity being managed well? And then finally, are there any OFIs being explored? So this is a very simple way to to do a whole bunch of stuff at once, but really get good information out of the time you're spending during the audit. And the other thing that the flowchart approach does is the flowchart will tell you, here we go. Aaron, would you like to tell us a little bit
Yeah.
about?
So this is brilliant. So I'm going to go back one just really
Sure.
quick to, okay, so what we're looking at here is a brilliantly laid out way to collect the information very easily, understand it. 1 or 2, 3, 4, 5, right? Are you okay? Is there OFI or is there a non-conformance? To go a step further, what I wanted to do is just represent to everyone how this could look like in a solution such as Safety Chain. So one big caveat here, big asterisk, we're not selling any software, but this is, to your point, a picture's worth 60,000 words, I think is now said.
Yes. Yes.
It's no longer 1,000 words, Jim, it's 60,000. So what I wanted to do is on the left side here, this is a screenshot of what these audits could look like. So if you imagine each one of these right here
Sorry.
would actually produce one line, okay? And so inside of that line, by the way, is you can make this departmental, because sometimes you're going to notice through audits, different departments may have their stuff together a little bit better than others. Now, first of all, I just want to make sure y'all understand this is a big problem. Like, this place is getting shut down immediately because there's a lot of red. But it's using a 5x5 risk assessment methodology. It's just a general manufacturing safety assessment, okay? What this allows you to do is very quickly understand, where do you need to provide more help? What in your organization, where in your plant needs the most help based on that audit, right? This should be a lot greener, right? Like, most of us would never see something like this, but what we end up doing is in our demos, we create this data, and we always like to show, hey, when a non-conformance occurs, some actions can get triggered so that a supervisor needs to, do record review and sign off. There's some things that need to happen after you have a non-conformance. We all know this. Well, this gives you the ability to dive into it quickly and understand what's going on. On the right side, Jim, what we're looking at is just one of those individual non-conformance records that you can get to very quickly to understand what's going on. You're talking about making things visual. You're talking about having evidence at your fingertips. And what you see here is a foreign material, right? So on the right, what we documented was a metal, right? So our metal detector went beep, 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 and we needed to take some actions, right? So this is what that looks like. You can actually take a picture of that product with the metal and add it to the record. You can also, if you look down though, you also have a record of what the flow is to so anybody at any time can see, oh, operators and supervisors know exactly what to do when this happens. You can follow that flow. So it makes it more visual. It makes people not as stressed ultimately, because what we want to do here, Jim, is get better, right? We found a product, we pulled it off. We need we need to shut down the line sometimes. We need to do some things, but we know, okay, here it is, let's go into action. So this is just a representation of what this could look like. Again, this is in Safety Chain. So
Thank you very much. And it's amazing that these days how so many things tie together. And that's the other thing about any management system, any organization really. It's every single part of the organization is tied in one way or another to another part. Thanks, Aaron. And this is an example here of another advantage of following the workflow to see if to get more information in the audit instead of just looking for following procedures, and even beyond looking for the result, the risk management, and the opportunity for improvement. using the workflow like this to perform your audit also lets you see the handoff. There's a handoff here, there's a handoff here, there's a handoff here. And I think if you looked at the sort of global events of nonconformances, I'd be willing to bet that 80% of them happen here in between the processes. All your employees know how to do their individual process, but what about the handoff? And sometimes it's such an seems to be such an insignificant thing that maybe some of you have heard the expression falls through the cracks. So by auditing with the flowchart and looking at the handoff, talking about the handoff, then it's certainly an opportunity to see if the handoffs are going as well as you'd hoped. So in this section, the first thing we talked about was having a conversational approach with your audit activities rather than making it adversarial or an interrogation or an investigation or an inspection. So we looked at a couple of ways, and then if you tie that into the safety chain software, evidence gathering can be made simple, and it's also possible, as many of you maybe have already done, turn the checklist into a pad, use it on a pad, use it on a laptop, use it on your phone. And then finally, following the workflow reveals more information about the handoffs, another place to find opportunities for improvement. And over to you, Aaron.
Yeah, so we got when this is the last poll question for us today. But this is a good one. We wanted to understand what kind of techniques in the interviewing side would you incorporate in your next audit. I'm interested in seeing your honest answers. Okay, again, this is the last one. I'm going to launch this poll. It'll take just a second to pull up. You should see it in front of you now. You know, are you going to use that conversational approach? Enhance maybe your interview skills overall, or simplify checklists, maybe incorporate better technology for evidence, and then reducing response time for underlying non-conformance, which I would argue with some technology, you can reduce that time for that non-conformance. You can get that line back up and running quicker if you can provide quickly the instructions to everybody on the floor to, hey, here's what to do, go into action, make this happen, get the line back up and running. And I do apologize really quick, everyone. That last poll, I thought you could do multi-choice. It was not set up. That's my fault. So I do apologize. I think this one is, but let's check. If anyone wants to do a quick chat into the questions and let me know if this one's working good. I'd appreciate that. We got about 50% that have voted. We do have some good questions coming in too, so I'm excited to get as well, Jim. So we're going to close the polling here real quick, get to those results, and take a peek at them. What's this telling you, Jim?
This is pretty exciting. Half the people here are perhaps going to try the conversational approach. It's also easier if you use a blank checklist and just write the steps in of the activity rather than doing a pre-populated checklist. But it depends on your organization, depends on your software, what it can do for you. Even if you do have predetermined questions, you can still approach the auditee with a conversation rather than just reading the question off. It looks like some people are interested in enhancing interview skills, simplifying checklists, and then the technology. Always exciting to see people's lives getting simpler, and the reducing response time. Have a read through some literature on layered process audits. They often talk about, in certain circumstances, actually doing the corrective action during the audit. I never would have thought that would be something I'd suggest, but there could be some circumstances where it would be helpful.
I have not heard of that. That's amazing. Okay.
Layered process audits. Thanks. Anything else?
We have a couple of questions about, hey, if will the deck be made available? Absolutely, everyone. Anyone on the phone here, anybody that registered with us earlier, everyone's getting this if you ask for it. So we'll make sure to follow up with everyone. So, okay, thanks, Lillian. I appreciate that. Same thing. So we're going to perform our own CAPA here at Beyond Compliance, and we'll make sure we got the polls working next time.
Yes, all right. Thanks. Okay.
Moving on, Jim, why don't you take us into this pushback?
All right. If you could pass the control over.
Results, don't I? There we go.
There we go. Thanks so much. All right. So in the final section, We're going to be looking at wording nonconformances. Definitely. I'll just go back to this for a second. No, there's the poll question. Thanks so much. Wording nonconformances can reduce pushback. Most people, just by human nature, don't like to be criticized. They don't like to be uh, they don't like to have faults pointed out. And even though every one of you here has heard the line, we're not auditing you, we're auditing the system, people hear those words, but sometimes they just don't believe it. And we're going to be talking about operator error, which is sometimes an often used phrase. We're going to look at poorly worded nonconformances and how it can hold back continual improvement, which is the holy grail. And then closing meetings. Just spent a little bit of time on that just to kind of give you some ideas on other ways to maybe sum up an audit. So operator errors is the actual root cause only 6% of the time. And what that means is that 94% of the time, there are other weaknesses in your system that either have allowed the nonconformance to happen or caused it to happen. So it's a good phrase to start using around your organization if you don't already. When you're starting to work or when you identify a nonconformance, just assure the person you're talking to that we'll find out where the weakness is in our system that allowed this to happen. If you can get that language started in your organization, sometimes people are less likely to be hesitant to submit nonconformances because oftentimes people feel like if I tell them about this, it might look like it's my fault and I'll have to make some explanation, some excuse. I hope most of your organizations are beyond that, but if you aren't, make sure you move in that direction. The operator did not follow the procedure. Another way to, because I still see this as an auditor, I audit for registrars as well as doing training. The problem is you're now pinpointing the person as not doing something, not performing an activity. Maybe they didn't, but there could be a reason. But another way to phrase it might be instead of creating this defensiveness, creating denial and creating deflection, you might try something like, and then again, you're not focusing on the weakness in the system. You're focusing on just saying the person didn't do what they were supposed to do. And clearly, you start looking for someone else to blame, and you're not focusing on on the system. And don't forget, there are upstream contributors to a nonconformance, and then there are downstream effects after the nonconformance as well. Instead, you could try a phrase like, the procedure has not been fully implemented. And I hope these don't sound like they're maybe treating, I've heard the phrase treating the person nicely. It isn't about that. It's about finding ways to state the truth and state what the evidence shows without actually blaming it on a person. So this is one way the procedure hasn't been fully implemented. Another way, the current procedure doesn't match current practice. And this is a great tool when the person has actually found a better way to do something and it hasn't taken the time to submit it and get it going through your document change procedure and all that kind of stuff. Now, if it's a procedure or a step that's required by law or by your customer or it's a very valuable step, that's a little bit different. Then that might be the time to use the procedure has not been fully implemented. And this is always a good one. There's inconsistent evidence for, or there's lack of evidence for, and then you'd state one of the requirements in the procedure that needs some evidence, but it isn't present. So that can take the focus off the person who is performing it, and it reduces the pushback because, as you all know, I'm sure you've all seen this, when people are pushing back or trying to defend a nonconformance, if it feels like it's their nonconformance, then they're not focused on improving the system at all. They're focusing on protecting their reputation. They're focused on not getting blamed for it. And with all those things going on, with all the energy being wasted in that area, we're definitely going to be have our heads turned away from making improvements to the system. And of course, your system also helps. It helps if it's easy to make improvements. People move into survival mode, not improvement mode. And if your organization isn't focused on improvement, it's often a precursor to becoming not just weak in your system approach, but weak in the market as well. Because if you're not getting better, your competitor is. I remember back in the 80s, I guess it was middle 80s, a Canadian driver named Scott Goodyear was in your next Monday's race at the Indianapolis 500. And he was in the 16th row on the outside when he started. And 500 miles later, he was 8 feet behind the leader. So there was, after all those hours, after all the driving, 500 miles, and they're 8 feet apart at the finish line. They were actually both on the bricks at the same time. Do you think the race committee said, holy smokes, they're that close, let's call it a tie? Not on your life was it a tie, which means that I'm trying to demonstrate that you don't have to make a big improvement to beat your competition. You don't have to be better in a large way, even if you just return phone calls 10 minutes sooner than your competitor did, or return an email sooner, or have a person wait a few seconds have shorter wait times. It doesn't take much. And those are the little things you can find out in an internal audit if you put your mind to it. And the accusatory wording always is a sort of a dark hole, a black hole, rabbit hole that'll help you lose the traction you could have making opportunities the forefront of an audit. And it also makes root cause analysis harder to conduct because people aren't looking for the real weakness in the system. They're looking for somebody to blame. And that's really another part of a really good, strong system is an excellent root cause approach. And I'm sure the safety chain system has some good approaches to root cause in there. And in the closing meeting, just to finish up, thank everyone. Again, this is what I do as a lead auditor for a registrar. There are a few more steps, but this is kind of the nuts and bolts of it. Thank everybody, assuming they were hospitable. Just talking big terms, a couple of sentences about what you saw. And if you're doing an audit as a lead auditor, you want to have a sort of a scratch pad of notable conditions you saw throughout, being conditions that you can honestly say, I've done a lot of audits and this is really well done. And then finally, finish up with the opportunities for improvements, and then the nonconformances and the next steps. And many of you know the reality in the closing meeting is, tell me where we messed up and let's get to it. But if you can spend a little bit of time making it a two-way conversation, invite feedback, that's always a good thing to do. And then at the end, instead of saying, are there any questions? And maybe some of you have felt this before, you can change the phrasing to, is there anything that needs to be clarified? Or something, some kind of phrase like that. Even in school, whenever I do training, I'll describe an exercise people are going into, and instead of saying, are there any questions, I usually say, is there anything else you need to know before you start this exercise? People are a little bit more willing to ask something than if you say, are there any questions, because sometimes they feel everybody else got it and they didn't. Anyway, so let's just do a quick summary and then we'll take it from there. Operator error is the root cause in only 6% of nonconformances. And if you really think about it, you could even take the operator error condition and say, okay, let's do whatever method you want to use, Ishikawa, 8D, 5 Whys, and find out why the operator, what was missing. Was there something missing that could have help this operator avoid this. Sometimes we just have a brain lapse and that's just the way it is. But sometimes there are conditions existing that operators it just caught their attention the wrong way and whatever. Anyway, it can even be sometimes there can even be a cause for the error in some cases. Poorly worded nonconformances are going to impair continual improvement with pushback. And then finally, you can get the auditee or the audit client excited about moving on when you perform the closing meeting with some empathy. So there we are. Are there any questions in the box, Aaron?
Yeah, there are a couple in here, absolutely. Can we remove the thanks for feedback reply from the screen? Patrick, I don't know how to do that. I'm sorry you're still saying that. If we can help you, we will, but we were going to get to a couple other questions. We got tons of them that came in. Jim, this is fantastic. This is an approach that I'm willing to bet is extremely new, right? Audits have traditionally been the A plus B equals C method, which is, you check something, you find something wrong, and then something gets done about it. What we're talking about here, and I love that you've brought in so many points about continuous improvement. This is a dynamic shift in how we think about our audits, right? Internal or external alike. Now, we're never going to be able to kind of fully control that external auditor coming in.
Oh, right? For sure. Absolutely.
That's it. But it's the ability to prepare for that. And so I think oftentimes in our own plants, in our own worlds, what are we doing? We're preparing for that audit, that type of an audit. So we understand first and foremost, everyone on the call, there's two sides to this. But when you're doing your internal audits, changing these things that like Jim is talking about will absolutely result in a better culture of continuous improvement. So I just wanted to take a second to mention that, and I appreciate your time. So you have a couple of questions. Somebody was asking about when we're back about the providing producing a conversational approach. They just asked, was there any examples of questions and starting out that conversational approach? Any go-to questions that you like to ask that are maybe generic that sort of sets the tone?
Yeah, great question. Especially if you've lived in a world where you've been handed a checklist and say, go make sure everybody's following their procedures. I like to teach auditors to start with something like, after you've introduced yourself, and I'm assuming for an internal auditor, they know who you are and you know that they know what's going on and so on. But something you can start with is, can you tell me a little bit about how the work flows through here? And just get them to talk about where their inputs come from, what they do to the input that they get, and when, how they know it's ready to go on to the next process and so on. Just getting them, because they know it so well, they know their own activities right to the marrow of their bones. So first thing it does, it puts them at ease, because they're talking about something they do every day and they know literally everything about, rather than saying, what do you do when a non-conforming something shows up here? It could be a service or a product, because that puts them on the spot, gets them thinking about, oh my God, what am I supposed to say here? So just get them talking about what they do. And then that typically leads it directly into some of them saying, and then I fill in a form. Oh, could we have a look at a few of those? Can you pick some out for me, or I'll pick some out? And that's what you put in the evidence box that you saw in the example, the piece that I've developed for my clients. Most of them use it. I use it myself if I'm doing internal audits with people. I use the registrar's materials when I'm doing those audits, but internal audits, people hire me for, I use that exact sheet that you saw. So that you gather the information. Thanks, could I see another one, or maybe one from exports, or maybe one from imports? So it gives you an opportunity to let them show you stuff they're familiar with. Yeah. And then you just kind of move on from there. And rather than saying what happens when, or what do you do when, if you can avoid the word you can't always, but when you say what do you do when, you can maybe even can feel it in yourselves as you hear me ask that question. You're kind of on edge. And it helps people relax. And believe me, sometimes you have the opposite problem. You can't get them to stop talking once they start. So and then that's when you have to be like you were today, Aaron, just wait for them to take a breath and say, thanks very much. Now, those are always good words to start with when you start talking and get ready for the next question. Thanks very much, and so on from there. And you can just listen to yourself when you're asking the question. Make sure it's not a test question. You're not asking to show you something or prove something.
Yeah, and I'm
Thanks.
moving back to a screen that's good. I'm going to set up the next question. That's really cool. So I'm going to set like these three words, memorize these three words, everyone. What happens when?
Yes.
That's how you start that. I love it. That simplifies it. It gets you out of the equation. It lets somebody lean in and focus on what's really going on in the process. What are we supposed to be doing, right?
Mhm.
Are your I've got so many notes here, Jim. Are your procedures getting you the results you need? It's not about
Yes.
finding non-conformances. So, all right, great. So next question. Next question. What is the relevance of an OFI as compared with observation? So going further, what if the scheme you are working with doesn't recognize OFI? For example, SQF version 9, first of all, congratulations on going 8.1 to 9. So thank you for that question. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about anything that isn't OFI related, right? When you think of, a nonconformance, that's usually a pretty, that's a cross.
Yep. Yeah.
What about,
Well, the definition of a nonconformance is non-fulfillment of a requirement. And then you have to decide, some companies are still using the major minor nonconformance. I guess in this case, a 1 would be a major nonconformance, a 2 would be a minor nonconformance. And then observations, I think, depending on what world you live in, an observation could be a positive point.
Yep.
And it could be something that typically it's something that if you don't do something about this, it could turn into a nonconformance for you. But any language you can use to bring an opportunity to the forefront, if you want to make the system better, but also make sure that people understand it's a nonconformance at the other end, you could almost change this scale to 1 to 3,
right.
And it could be 1's a nonconformance, 2's an OFI, and 3 it's okay. But I thought there was an opportunity here for a little bit of refinement, especially if somebody's still living back in the 87 version of ISO, they might want the major minor option for nonconformances. But anything that's going to enhance the understanding. But the observation's cool for this in the final report if you want to, for identifying really neat things, good things, effective things.
Yeah, and this would be something that to go a little further, you would just simply, so if you think about switching this ISO 9001 out very quickly and you just say SQF9, and you're going to bend that basically to that schema. Yeah. And then these things will change. I think that the architecture stays very similar, to answer the question a little bit further. And then what's nice about Safety Chain, I'm sorry, I got to say it, all of those schemas are actually baked in. You can actually click on a record number and get to the schema that supports it, so that you do see that it is relevant to SQF9, or if it's VRC or FFSC 22000. All of those schemas actually exist in the system. You're not guessing which one you're using, so it's very flexible that way as well. So
Neat.
awesome.
Thanks.
So
just one quick last thing for if you're still doing your audits manually, those columns at the right hand end, OFI nonconformance are okay. You can just skim down your sheets. I'll get 15 or 20 sheets like this per day when I'm auditing, and you can really see quickly where the nonconformances are and the OFIs are. Thanks. Anything else from your end, Aaron?
No, I think that's good. We've got a couple more questions. I'm going to try and squeeze them in really quick.
Sure.
So one's a really nice question. I think this is a general question that everyone can get value from. So what would you recommend for an internal audit? Have one QA person or compliance team do the audits, or cross-train a team and let there be enough internal auditors? Any recommendation on how you formulate your internal auditing team?
Yeah. First of all, the more the merrier. That's number one. So nobody feels persecuted and just sort of smothered by this activity. And the next one, it's a proven fact, and it's been demonstrated with many studies, hundreds really, that a cross-functional team will always have a better result in terms of conclusions than a homogeneous team. So the more variety you can have on your auditing team, the better.
Yeah, I would add to that. Grab a if you can. I know it's hard sometimes to grab somebody from operations. Grab an operator. Because
Oh,
that's going to be that ultimate across the, now you've got people that go, oh, wait a second, I didn't know I could do that. You may find things in these, you could improve some yield. I mean,
oh,
honestly, it's not just about nonconformances. At the end of the day, you can improve your entire productivity.
yeah. Especially if you get operators talking to operators and operators auditing operators, if they've developed good auditing skills, that is, they can trade ideas with each other and get them and find another way to improve. Absolutely true. If you read anything about layered process auditing, LPAs, you'll see that they actually literally have operators included in the
Yes.
auditing all the time, daily operator audits. Thanks.
Yep, great. One last question, and then we're gonna leave it at this, but we do have a good one. What is the proper way to formulate nonconformance? Do you have any template or form that can help me formulate the nonconformance? So we've got a couple of templates that we saw today. Is there any extra guidance you can share?
The thing I emphasize when I'm training lead auditors is when you make a nonconformance statement, make sure that you're going to be stating the truth. You have to state the truth. And you'd never use words like it appears that, or it seems that, or anything, any wiggle room words. You say the XYZ, the requirement for XYZ has not been met or not been fully met, whatever way you'd like to say it, and then add for example, and then give the examples, the exact form you're looking at, the exact record you're looking at, not mentioning the person. Of course, you could put it on your checklist to check their competence, clause 7.2, and training records and so on, but not in the report, not in the, wouldn't name them in the nonconformance. And you'd name the clause of whatever standard you're using, whatever set of requirements you're using. But stating the truth, number one, state the truth, have irrefutable evidence. We call it verifiable evidence that what you're saying is true. And that's really pretty much it. Just make a true statement and have evidence to back it up. And there you go.
Fantastic. I love it. Very simple. In copywriting lingo, that would be called assertive language, not passive language. Language that makes the reader more confused is not good language.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks, Aaron. And
Absolutely. So, hey, listen, let's make sure you all connect with Jim online. Several ways to do so: LinkedIn, also Twitter. Please visit simplifyiso.com and then the IAMCIPRO.org as well. Lots of great material out there. We also have a guide, The Magic of Internal Audits, Mistakes, Insights, and Advice over at safetychain.com. But I really appreciate taking time today, Jim. This has been fantastic. I always learn stuff every time. I'm moderating Beyond Compliance, and I definitely got a huge helping of learning today with you. So thanks for joining us.
well, and thanks to the audience for taking time another day and joining us too. Even if you're looking at this after the fact, thanks for taking the time to explore this topic a little bit more. Thanks, Aaron.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. And just a reminder, everyone gets the presentation after this. We'll make sure everyone gets the follow-up and connect with us offline as you can. So that'll do it for us today here for Beyond Compliance. We appreciate you taking time out of your day joining us, and we'll see you next time. That will conclude today's webinar.